morning, everybody, and welcome to The Art as Well. My guest this morning was described by no less than the Irish Times as the most censored artist in Britain and Ireland since James Joyce.
Probably.
I beg your pardon, probably. And he is, of course, Seán Hillen, and I'm delighted to welcome him this morning. Good morning, Seán. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very well.
And thank you very much, because I know you had a late night last night.
I did.
Not out in the town, but doing sort of technical work.
Hammering the keyboard. I finally got a new website going, which is very exciting.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And it's obviously the same name, Seán Hillen.
It is, exactly. But it's, anyway, websites will drive you crazy, you know, they'll make your brain go inside out. But
well, we won't talk too much about that then.
But it's a marvelous new website, so.
Excellent. Okay, well, we'll look forward to having a look at that.
Thank you.
Now, we thought we'd start the morning by showing this film, which is a documentary on Seán, and it was created by Gillian Marsh. She directed it, and it's a superb, a very, emotional, in-depth look at the artist. And I would advise you to look at the entirety, which you can get on Netflix. It's about an hour and a half long, but I've taken the liberty, with permission, to edit it down to about 10 minutes. And I think it does give a flavour throughout the film as to what the film is about. So if you'll indulge me in that, before chatting to Seán, I'm going to show a clip from that film.
I get very mixed messages from the world. I think I've made good pictures. And I've failed to make a living at it. I've got this work and I really care about it and I want it to be seen. And it doesn't really mean anything if it's not seen. You know, this should be 3 people with cotton gloves, really. This is the one that's on the cover of the book on Irish art, which I always point out because I'm so proud of it. And my life probably doesn't really mean anything if that work isn't seen. My project at the moment is to save my skin. So I've been here maybe, 12, 13 years. This is, my living room, but I actually kind of live here, and this is my bed. And it was my big investment when I moved in. It's a nice, big, heavy, actually comfortable sofa bed. But the room is so full, and I'm on my own here so much. I made sure to get one that was big enough for me to sleep on this way. Yes. Well, so this is this proper studio. Sometimes I come up here and I feel excited, and sometimes I come up here and I feel repelled and overwhelmed by it, And it's not good, that, because you want to, if you're making art, you want to feel the possibility and the hunger and the excitement, not a cesspit of kind of guilt and struggle and pain and failure. It kind of reminds me of where I'm failing. It's a little bit of a prison, and it's stopping me working is the most important thing, actually. I like lying on the floor, and I haven't been able to. Something very calming about it. I had no idea I was like that.
Oh, yes, Sean, take the chair, then you can keep it. I'll take them out. I couldn't, Mommy, I couldn't.
When my parents passed away, they died in 04 and 05, so I couldn't hear it. Right. But now it's super precious to me. To hear her voice is marvellous.
Did you see much of them after you left home?
Very intermittently. I stayed away very much. And if I went home for a few days, I got bored and fractious and wanted to go again. I used to feel very guilty about it. Now I don't. Like, they wanted me really to go and have my life, you know. But my mother used to weep every time I left. I felt most guilty, actually, that I was not a success and that I was poor, and that there's a little note there pinned up from my daddy saying, "Here's £10." Little, and I was probably I was probably in my 30s, and they were sending me tenors, you know, that they couldn't afford probably, and I might well go buy prosecco with it. And that's very Aspergery, that your project is so important, and that everybody should understand that. More film. I found the original tape of Seamus Heaney opening the first exhibition, and that's an amazing. I was starstruck. Like, I barely spoke to him, you know. But again, it was one of the things where I thought I was kind of made again, you know.
The SHs of this world, those people who were born and brought up in Northern Ireland and who were not stupid or insensitive, those people couldn't help realising that they were living in two places at the one time. On the island of Ireland on the one hand, and in the British states on the other. These photomontages embody these tensions. The title of this exhibition, Atlantis, isn't just a verbal trick, in other words. It's about conditions of anxiety. Atlantis was a lost city. Atlantis is a lost city. And in this, it's sort of like Ireland. Ireland is one of the few nouns that has tenses.
That was, you know, that was a life-changing night. And suddenly I was cool. It was, you know, the great intellectual stamp of interestingness, which mattered to me more than anything. It mattered to me maybe more than anybody else. And it mattered to me as well because my parents were able to come to that, you know. It meant that it was somehow significant, what you were doing, you know. I still hadn't solved the problem of making money. Amazing thing, because I didn't know whether I had it or not. I remember standing beside him and going, oh my Jesus. You know, this exhibition was an enormous deal. This was my first show in a private gallery in Dublin, and I had 8 Atlantis new originals, and we were looking for somebody to open the exhibition, and nobody would do it because I was so associated with the Troubles, and this was still the early 90s. I was in a panic about it, and I don't know what it was. I hadn't had any dealings with Heaney, but, you know, he was a hero to me and someone from a similar background. And I made a little book of the things and left it at his doorstep with a note asking him if he would open the show. And he rang me the next morning and said he would open the show. It was an incredible coup because his star was very high. I think he won the Nobel Prize the following year, maybe. The response was amazing. You couldn't get into the gallery. You couldn't get up the stairs to get into the opening.
Seán Hillen and I actually share the same initials, which spells shh.
Well, the difference is that everything has changed. I got taken on by a wonderful international gallery, a top gallery, Anna Patricia Kahn, and she deals at the very high end. And this is what I've always wanted, really, is to get the work seen. She saw my work accidentally, was shown it accidentally by a friend of a friend, of an agent that I've worked with. And she is hopefully going to sell work to the National Gallery. So that's enormous in itself. Oh my gosh. The good things can actually happen. You put yourself out a bit. It's kind of extraordinary. It's taken me a while. It's not entirely sunk in, except that the huge weight and terror has gone. and I feel able to sit and play with collages. And the greatest thing is that people are seeing the work and are going to see the work, and people with money who might buy it are going to see the work, and that's a complete turnaround in life. The biggest thing that happened is that Amy came here and is still here, got kind of trapped by the COVID thing. We've been just having a shamefully great time during the lockdown. And I have a little garden, as you see, for the first time. And Amy's growing some vegetables from seeds. It's a huge change in affairs. We adore each other, you know. We're crazily, we're like two kids. My sweetheart, you know, playing and going on adventures and then making pictures together. I'm like very moved about it because I'm so happy, and you know that I feel unstoppable again. I'm going to go and make you another coffee, darling, at some point. Oh, boy, that's good.
So I hope it will encourage you to watch the full length film, which is on Netflix, okay?
I always say it's a brilliant film despite me being in it.
Well, there is that. Jane German has just said it's a super film. She's seen it 3 times. And I know a few other people who've seen it 3 times, like Leah and others. Am I right? Yeah. So it is. It's the sort of film you can't watch once. You have to watch it twice.
You know, there's a vast amount on the cutting room floor. It was Documentary of the Year, and it won the Audience Award at the IFI, which is a huge thing.
Did it really?
Yeah.
Fantastic. And tell me something, why was it called Tomorrow is Saturday?
Well, you saw at the very end there, we were stuck for a title. You want a unique title. I really envy people. Like, I'm sort of friendly and lucky to have Roy Foster as a collector, and Roy is a master of good titles for his books. Mm-hmm. And you want something that's immediately resonant and unique, so that you can be found. And we were stuck for a title. And I lived in London for many years. And on a market stall, I used to haunt the markets, of course, because I love things and bits of paper. I used to love the Walworth Road market. I bought a human skull there once, which was a mind-blowing thing.
Yeah.
But on the market stall one day, I found a little wooden flashcard from primary school that some child must have stolen from school, I presume. And it said, "Tomorrow is Saturday." And I thought that was a wonderful aphorism. To kind of work today because tomorrow is Saturday. Fantastic. And I've had it on my wall ever since London, and it's on my front door, so I see it every time I go in and out. And we saw it. Someone, Gillian probably, in her brilliance, thought that was a good title, and it is a marvelous title.
Fantastic. And at the very, very beginning of it, you do say, "I don't see the world the way others do."
Definitely, I think.
Can you elaborate on that? Because
well, I discovered part of the reason the film got made was that I got a diagnosis of, you know, high functioning autism or Asperger's. Mm-hmm. And I was always an unusual, I'm sort of a genius, but one who didn't know what day it is. And I forget to eat, and my brain won't process faces properly. And which all of these are very disturbing things in normal life, you know. I'm not really very good at normal life, but I can make pictures that Heaney and Fenton and you know, Roy Foster admire, and you know, I'm on these dozens of book covers. I must be doing something right, but at the same time, you know, it's not all flowers and joyous banquets.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I understand that. And if we go back to your childhood, I know we don't want to speak too much about politics, but you did grow up in the Troubles in Northern Ireland, born in Newry and so on.
Very much.
And you couldn't but be influenced by that.
Yes.
To the extent, and I hope I'm allowed to say this, that your father stopped you one day and you
Yes.
had a bomb in your hand.
Well, a homemade incendiary device.
Well, okay, whatever you want to call it.
Well, it wasn't really going to hurt anybody, and I
Yeah.
wasn't going to get far with it. And I think I was 13 or something, and I was like a weird child. And I was going to burn Woolworths, which
Yes.
seemed like a good idea when I was 13. But it's really hard to imagine the insanity of the world we lived in, and the level of violence was so pervasive. And had, I woke on the morning. I was 11 on the morning of internment, and woke to very loud armored cars outside the window, and opened the Venetian blinds just to see one of the neighbors' teenagers being dragged by two soldiers backwards and thrown in the back of an armored car, And but my father was a trade union man, and he used to address other men as brother, which I still find very moving. And we were brought up to love and respect everybody, but at the same time we were in this cauldron of violence.
I know.
So it made me an artist.
Well, that's what I was going to say. The fact that you were caught at that impressionable age,
yes,
was a bit of a turning point, probably, because your father was so livid and upset.
Well,
he encouraged you to change your career somewhat.
well, they bought me a camera to try and distract me, which was a wonderful thing.
Exactly.
But like the whole thing of growing up in the Troubles, it was profoundly to find as somebody who thought a lot and read a lot, you had to find an intellectual position which made sense. And I've been through, like, my life has been a roller coaster, and I've been through a lot of kind of revisions and epiphanies. But I grew up with Blue Peter, and because we couldn't get RTE and British television, and once a year I loved Blue Peter and making things out of sticky back plastic and the inside of toilet rolls. But once a year the band of the Royal Marines would come and parade around the studio. But in our house in Newry, you could look through your back window and see the same guys in full camouflage pointing their guns at you as they went by, and you knew that they could shoot you and get away with it. And I realized at one point there was an us and a them, and I might be the them. So it was like very traumatic, and I still have a bag of PTSD and all of that, like a lot of people do, especially my generation. But
because a lot of your friends got mixed up, and
well, I went to school. When I was at the Slade, I discovered that the guy who'd been my best friend when I was 13, we used to pull old motorbikes and cars apart. And I discovered that when he was 18, he disintegrated himself priming a bomb in his sister's bedroom, which is absolutely awful. And I think that I probably also had dealings with or met the guy who probably provided the bomb and probably booby-trapped it so it would go off.
Good God.
Yeah. It's the depths of the psychopathy, or it's very hard for a human being to process it, Yeah.
But so did you go to London then to kind of get out of this?
Yeah, I did. Well, I went to Belfast first to a foundation, as was the best thing to do at the time, because I didn't know. I was a bad painter, really, at the time. I could draw, but not well enough for me. But I was already a skilled photographer, I think. And I went to Belfast first, and then I tried to get in, and because I had these photographs, I got into LCP, which was the paragon of media schools at the time, London College of Printing. And it was also in the 80s quite liberal in the way. There was kind of a fine art thing going on. There was a very eccentric tutor called Ken McMullen, who's a filmmaker. And it was a very absolutely fascinating. The staff there were absolutely fascinating. There was a huge variety of people. The head of photography, his main claim to fame was that he'd been chief photographer for the Bata Shoe Company. So there were people who were very straight photographers.
Yes.
And there was a very elderly guy called Heino Johansson, who was an old school European art photographer who had reportedly been in the Lithuanian SS as a teenager.
Whoa. Yeah.
And the head of department was a guy called Adrian. Oh my God, second name I can't remember. And he taught himself to play piano and popped up on Top of the Pops one night, having written a song called Disco Sheep. So there was like everything going on in that school,
Yes,
you
yeah.
know.
But then you went to the Slade
Yes, I
School
was
of Art.
out for a few years. I felt like I wanted to get I wanted to get skills,
Hmm. Yeah,
and but then I really wanted to be stamped as an artist, as a, you know,
yeah,
a true, an actual artist, and the Slade was that for me.
sure. And you spent about 10 years or so in London. What sort of things were you doing
Oh,
there?
about 14 years.
14.
Well,
Okay.
I had a career. You know, I got picked up pretty much straight from the Slade, and I was included. Sarah Kent did a thing called Young Masters in Time Out,
Mhm.
and my Slade show was pretty good, if I say so myself, quite entertaining, because
Yes.
I've always wanted to. I wanted the audience to get something out of the work. You know, I don't make work for the desk ever.
Yeah.
You know, I make work for the public, and I really, really want people to. I really want to communicate. It's that basic,
Mhm.
and so I went straight into exhibiting from the Slade, and I ended up, you know, on going. I would expect to get a magazine cover,
Yeah.
but at the end of it, when I was there for 14 years, and at the end of it, well, it was the early coming to the 90s, and the peace process was starting,
Yeah.
and I was seen as controversial. I discovered later, but I was already starting to get cut from shows at the last moment.
Right.
And I went from suddenly, you know, being, you know, expecting a lot of attention to not being able to get exhibited. And I was in a show, a major show in the Barbican.
Hmm.
And at the last moment, that's when I first met Peter Kennard, who's the master of photomontage and whom I admired very much. And I went in for a meeting to decide to make the final decision about the work. And the chap said, Seán, you know, we've realized that we don't have a lot of room, and we don't have a lot of room to show a lot of your work, and it wouldn't be fair to show just a little, so we're not showing any.
Yeah. The old excuse.
Well,
But I mean,
but
you know, to talk about lows and then highs.
yeah,
There was another situation where your work was bought or supposedly bought by the Imperial War Museum in
true.
London.
Well, the War
Tell me
Museum,
the story behind that.
well, there was a wonderful keeper there. They have the second biggest collection after Tate Britain,
Yeah.
because of their brief. They've hit a million things, I think. Wonderful, wonderful art collection, and they just published a wonderful book actually based on it that I'm very happy to be in. But
Mhm.
they bought my work while I was still at the Slade, but told me they were expressly forbidden to exhibit it.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
that's a mixed blessing. But
Yeah.
better to be in the museum than not in the museum.
Yeah.
And then, there was a thing called Clause 28 of the Local Government Act, so you could actually be punished and lose funding if it was a subject unpopular with Lady Thatcher.
Yes.
And so people were. I mean, I don't blame people for leaving me out of things now. I can't really take it personally at this stage, you know. As
Well, I mean,
Hillen's
I'd take £50,000 personally if I was offered that, and then you
Well,
know,
I had to not, like, I was bitter and angry, of course, you know, like it devastated my life. The War Museum, they decided in 2004 to buy most of my remaining collection of Troubles collages. They
yeah,
invited me over, and I agreed to sell them for 50,000 quid. And what happened was, for the first time in their history, they were refused the money. And then
gosh,
they were
yeah,
refused the money again the following year, and then they were refused the money again the following year. They actually put together a whole education program to go with the work,
yeah,
and this was, you know, unprecedented, really. But it left me after 5.5 years with the work tied up for 5.5 years, so I couldn't sell it.
yes,
And at the end of it, there was no money and quite a large overdraft. So that actually was a
that's
huge
dreadful.
financial kicking. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, as him says in Ulysses, history is to blame. It appears, you know.
mm,
Like, I can't take it personally, although, you know, it could damage your mojo, you know.
yeah,
And I had to struggle with that a lot to kind of maintain a kind of working attitude to the work, you know.
I know, yeah. And all that sort of disappointment was that the instigator of coming back to Dublin, or what?
Kind of. It was probably natural end to it. You know, I'd made, it turns out, I've only made about 350 collages in 40 years. I don't think people realize how few there are.
Yeah,
And I'd made about 100, maybe a little bit more, Troubles ones, and they were a little bit neurotic. because I kept hammering at these things. I mean, I wanted to make every work something you've never seen before. And I want it to be also something that you can look at every day and get something out of, which is not easy, really. And I want everyone to be better than the last one, which is not really possible. So, but I kind of had come to the end of it, and London and I, as I used to say, had got tired of each other.
Yeah.
And I'd met Damien Hirst as a student. I had a girlfriend at Goldsmiths at the time, and when I was quite a big success. And then at one point, I was living on scones from Tesco, and I picked up the Sunday Times one day, and Damien was bragging that he was spending £200 a week on taxis. And I thought, and the Dole people were tired of me, as they incessantly were. And
Yes.
they actually told me that they would leave me alone for a year if I would, quote unquote, fuck off back to Ireland. So we agreed on that. And I didn't know where to go.
Yes.
I'd never spent a night in Dublin.
Yeah.
And I decided to throw my lot into Dublin. And I just moved lock, stock and barrel and walked around Dublin with all my troubles working 2 carrier bags, which was an educational experience.
I'd say so. I'd say so. And when did you come upon that lovely house of yours?
And around 2005, I had a partner who decided that I'd actually become financially viable. And she was a very good organizer, and we did a couple of very big commissions together, and I did some big commissions, and we were turning over quite a lot of money. And I had become friends because among my collectors tend to be, I always say, people with eyes, like architects in particular, other artists, filmmakers, film directors. And I met Tom DePrere, the architect, very wonderful architect, at a party with a filmmaker, Rowan Morgan, and they declared themselves my biggest fans. So I was in love on the spot. And Tom used to come around and buy work and sneak them home under his coat so his partner wouldn't see them. And at a certain point, he wanted to sell this studio, which was his personally designed studio. And it happened that I had turned over a lot of money, and they were given mortgages to cats and dogs. So I bought it in 2005, which was a little bit insane and a wild gamble, but I felt you have to live somewhere. And I felt if I could make a picture a month, I could pay the mortgage,
Yes, yes. And how did it pan out?
Very mixed, as most things do. Like, I'm very cheerful these days and things are going a great deal better. But I had to stop paying the mortgage. I couldn't maintain the mortgage because of that censorship, to be honest. Like I'm in a lot of institutions and a lot of good collections, but some of the Irish institutions just refused to collect my work, and that kept my prices down. And
so this is all based on political grounds, presumably. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's maybe the work is terrible. That's not.
Well, no, we know that's not true, but there has to be some underlying reason.
It seemed to be troublemaking, and and again, my autism plays a part of that. Partly, it's a kind of terrible thing, but if I meet a gallery director at an opening, I'm probably not going to recognize them, which is not great.
Mistake number one.
But so I had to stop paying the mortgage. I paid the mortgage for years by selling my work at any price, which is a toxic, dangerous thing to do. Partly because they're kind of intended for public collections. I really want them to be in public collections so that lots of people would see them.
Yes.
But I'm very lucky that people love them and want them enough, to buy them. And it's kind of perverse. I mean, they're tiny, tiny things in the flesh. Like, that's not a big one, but it's not a small one either.
Sure.
And so it's kind of hard in Ireland to get the few thousand quid I absolutely need to get.
But you do produce prints, limited edition prints of the works. Otherwise, based on the fact that you've only done 300 and something.
Yeah,
I know. You need to be doing that.
No, my own worst. I mean, I actually love prints, and I own a couple of archival printers, and I take great pride and pleasure in making very beautiful prints. Although I actually never really industrialized it. I used to have 2 or 3 print galleries in Dublin before the crash. And now I'm with one Jam Art in Temple Bar. So, and I used to have a website that was extremely busy. And then when the film came out, I needed a new site. But now at last I've got a new site that actually you can buy prints from.
Well, I was just going to say that. Can you do that?
Yeah, you can.
You can.
Which is really wonderful.
Okay.
Although
Well,
some of my most popular things, like Boating on the Liffey,
yeah.
that a lot of people will have seen, is out of edition now in its main edition, because my main edition is just 100.
Yeah.
So it's the Irish market. I mean, Ireland's too small a place really to be, if I'd known.
I know.
But it's a good job that I didn't know. I think we're protected by naivety and innocence, you know. We kind of run along towards things.
But you did get a bit of good news in the fact that Anna Patricia Kahn,
Yes, bless
who's
her.
a gallerist in Switzerland
Yes,
and deals in very, very high-end
yes,
work, has taken you on.
yes.
And
It's a life-size thing.
when
And
did that actually happen, Sean?
it happened about 3 to 4 years ago while
Okay.
we were making the film. And it happened by accident. A work that I'd sold to a dealer in London was in her office. And Anna Patricia had because she handles the estates of Henri Lartigue and Lee Miller in particular, who's done a lot of work on Ireland, a lot of international photographers. And she works internationally. And she had the brief from the National Gallery to source work related to Ireland when they decided to acquire photography. And she found my work in London and brought it to the National Gallery, which was really wonderful and extraordinary. But
And that has actually happened, because you alluded to that in the film, but I don't think it had happened at the time.
No, it hadn't. No, it's an amazing thing. Interesting thing, and part of the clear out of the studio is that we discovered that I have about 100 what's called vintage prints of my Troubles photos, because the negatives are now in the National Library, and they spent 20 years literally in a carrier bag and are not printable anymore. And I printed them to use them in collages. And it turns out I have about 100 of those prints left. So they're absolutely unrepeatable, unique prints. And there's actually an enormous market for those internationally because they're so unique and because they're historic and all of that. So that's really a wonderful thing. So that's part of the thing she deals in. So the National Gallery acquired 2 of those and a Troubles era collage. So that's a really wonderful thing. And she's going to show me later this year in a major international show, which is actually a life-size career thing for a photographer. I won't say what it is, but it's like the peak of the international photography art business.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, that's really good. And when is that happening?
Probably September.
September, okay.
I don't want to give too many clues, but yeah.
Can't say where, because I know.
It's not formally.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Right. We'll say no more.
We'll be depressed if it doesn't happen.
Yeah, that sounds very positive.
Yeah, no, good things are happening for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to show some of your work so you can talk through them.
Oh, do please.
Context, yeah.
Well, what's marvelous about it, there's 2 things. I mean, I think it's a wonderful photograph. And I only discovered it when we were clearing the studio. And it's one print of that photo and the negatives are long, long gone. And I took it when I think I was about 15, maybe 16.
Yes.
And I think that the school I went to was big in Gaelic football, and half the Down team and half the Armagh team came from it. And my teacher was one of the managers, and he took me to Croke Park because I was taking pictures of football. I was a terrific football photographer because I was completely disinterested in the game. So I could actually watch for photos.
Yes.
And I went to this Croke Park, I believe it's Hill 16, and there was some fracas between the teenagers in the background, and the guards are waiting, and it's actually a very Seán Hillen photo. Like, you see the boy in the foreground whose eye I've caught.
Yes.
And you can kind of see the dynamics and the body language and all of that, and it's kind of sweetly framed with a barbed wire. You can see a bit of sellotape actually on the top left corner, which is unfortunate. And that's a thing we don't do these days, is use unarchival materials. But it's just a marvelous thing, and it shows that I was already an automatic and natural photographer, you know, when I was 15, because I'd been doing it for years already, and I didn't have to think about the exposure, or, you know, and I seem to have been a natural at the composition.
Yeah.
So it was a gorgeous discovery, and I kind of envy the guy who took it, you know.
Okay, this one is Belfast.
Yeah, this is my first year in art school in Belfast, and I went to photograph the 12th of July because Newry was in the 70s. This is 1979, 1980, was like 97% Catholic. but the surrounding land was Protestant and the businesses were Protestant. No, so the 12th of July, you could hear the Orange March, but you couldn't see them. And so this was my first time to go with a camera to an Orange March. And in Belfast, it was like a little bit drunken and had a little air of menace, but like excitement. And it was enormous fun. The thing about the camera is that it was a license to go and look at people and things. Yes. And I used it to engage with like individual people, because when you make that eye contact, it kind of draws you into the picture. And it's enormous fun to capture this. Like I'm shooting, you know, I might have 2 rolls of film. So and that's the case for all these black and white photos. I'm counting every frame. Yeah. And I spotted these girls and I took one frame and I stayed with them and just caught this moment. I see the girl on the right there has bought a record in Eason's.
I see, yes. Oh, yes, I see now, yeah.
Rod Stewart is my guess.
Yes, probably.
But it's an amazing thing about photograph that it has so much going on in it. You do kind of capture a world in it, you know, if you're lucky or good, which is the art, isn't it? So it's very exciting to make these things and to feel that you've got that in the can. There's something of the hunting instinct in it. Yes. And something daring.
Yeah. Seán, at this point now, collage wasn't coming into it. You were pure photography.
No, I'd never made a collage, but it very quickly came into it because I needed to, you know, the photos in themselves. So the photos in themselves were interesting, but by the time I was at art school in London in the early 80s, the best photographers in the world had been photographed in Northern Ireland. And so people didn't want to see more black and white pictures, no matter how good they were. After McCullen and Gilles Perez and the other masters, you know, there was no hunger for any more. And also I felt that the photographs weren't complex enough and I couldn't really say enough. And growing up in the north and then being in the lovely atmosphere of art school in London, although it was just 45 minutes away, you know, I wanted people to stand in my shoes and to kind of smell it. In fact, so this collage is so I started putting things in to the collages to transform them into different worlds. I would like conceive of a title and then I could work on a series. Yeah. But one of my arts and one of my secrets, if I have any, is that I don't know what I'm going to make before I make it. Okay. And I compose it in front of my eyes from the bits of paper. And so this is from a series called The Professionals, based on, you know, the TV series, and I would be buying annuals to cut the pictures out of. And it's partly about the crazy, secret, dirty war that was going on. And you didn't really know who somebody was if they got out of a car, you know. Yeah. I actually, this is the truth, and it's a measure of my PTSD. For many, many years, until not that long ago, when I walked into a room, I would parse the walls for how well they would withstand different types of gunfire. Would you? That's terrifying, really, to think about, isn't it? It's kind of terrifying, insane. Yeah. But at the same time, it was like Ireland, and it was like Newry is a very lively town. It has a great cultural life, but it's mostly music and theatre. And, you know, I used to go to musicals in Newry Town Hall. And like once you've seen a bunch of Newry people doing Oklahoma with rouged cheeks, it's kind of everything looks great. But it was like enormous fun and lively. And I had a wonderful school teacher who read literature to us. Yeah. And I used to be able, and Newry had Ireland's first purpose-built art centre. And can we go back to that picture actually, just to tell you a story? Yes. Well, I have so many great stories about Newry. It lends itself to marvelous stories. Yeah. I used to be able to ring the art centre and say, I've got an exhibition, and they'd say, when do you want to do it? Because I used their basement, which wasn't used for anything else. There are 2 lovely stories I think of immediately. Was that I was in the basement once putting up an exhibition, and a guy came in with a couple of 4x2s on his shoulder and put them down, and then another guy came in with a couple more, and they kind of piled up. And I asked them eventually what's with the 4x2s, and they said, oh, we're built in Santa's Grotto. So they had booked Santa's Grotto in the same space and forgotten that I was booked into it. So I had Santa's Grotto in the exhibition, which brought me a whole new public. Yes, I'd say so. Yeah. And this collage, I gave it to the local paper that I used to work for as a teenager. I used to get 50 pence a picture, and that's where I honed my skill as a photographer.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I used to go to social events, do the things nobody else wanted to do,
Mm-hmm.
and you become very able photographer because you've got to get your picture and you've got to control a crowd,
Yeah,
and you're not getting paid much to do it. And I used to do football that nobody else wanted to do, and
yeah.
I had this show anyway. I loved the, a challenging, exciting, thought-provoking show, and at the bottom, visit our restaurant and sample our salad bar. That's very Ireland and very Newry as well. And when
Very
we,
much in vogue, I'd say, probably the
and
salad bar.
yeah, it was a life of
Yeah,
this
yeah,
town, really,
yeah,
and you wanted to get people into it, of course.
yeah.
But I gave the local paper this collage to use as an illustration, and when they published it, as you can see on the left, somebody got nervous about the photo and they decided to scratch out the number plate and the guys' faces because they thought they were real SAS men.
Ah, right. Yeah.
Which is amazing. And I found that again and again because I was making pictures while it was still, very much a live subject.
Yes, yes.
And the War Museum told me, in fact, that they have a lot of photos of me taking the photos of soldiers. Anyway.
Which wasn't allowed.
No, all those photos were taken illegally.
Yeah.
And in fact, the photo on the right of the border checkpoint in Newry, which is very near, like it's a couple of 100 yards from my sister's home, I was terrified taking that photograph from the train going by, and I fully expected to meet a bunch of policemen, at least at the railway station when I got off. But I didn't, thank him. But I did get arrested a couple of times and put in a cell for an hour, at least once, for taking the photos or for having those photos,
Yeah.
But these are, so I was making work in series, and that would be my technique. I'd kind of form a kind of a verbal joke, and they're mostly driven by language, but then that lets me go off and play. And so I discovered that I was born an hour after the first man in space landed.
Ah.
And he was Yuri Gagarin.
Yes.
12th of April 1961, and he landed about 9:30, and I was born about 11:30 maybe. And so I thought, fuck it, I can be the Yuri Gagarin.
So did you transpose your face onto?
I did. I made a whole series of myself coming back as a spaceman because I was very aware of this whole thing about the conflict, that we're capable of doing this dreadful war stuff, and we're capable of doing amazing godlike things, and it's a wonderful metaphor. And there's also an ambivalence about it. Collage has a fascinating history. There's a history of comedy, and also it's used a great deal in advertising, but you'll often find that it's used with a strapline that gives you a key into the meaning of it. And so my work is kind of influenced by advertising, and as we'll see, has actually influenced advertising. Yeah. So the one on the left is a Yuri Gagarin, and it's kind of an image of freedom, the spaceman, although he's kind of dependent on technology, and the angel can just totter, can leap across the clouds. And the one on the right is called Gagarin Crosses the Border, and that's him in his capsule from a Ladybird book. I mind Ladybird books a lot because the illustrations are so sweet and so clear.
Aren't they? Yeah.
And that's the only collage that I've sold twice, actually. I sold it to the wonderful comedian, performer, Kevin McAleer, who's an old friend and someone I admire very, very dearly. Brilliant, very serious comedy. And I think we're in a very Irish tradition that I would say goes back to Swift, probably goes back to Brehon times, of serious comedy, of using comedy as a kind of a weapon. Yeah. And to kind of engage your enemy, in a conversation. So actually that collage, after the War Museum, well, I sold the collage first to Kevin McAleer because he was quite rich at one point, it seemed, in our, youthful culture. He had done a huge tour, and I was on one of my poor circuits, and he bought that collage from me. And but he never actually got the collage because it was forever an exhibition, because it's probably the most wonderful thing I've made, in my opinion. And he never, poor Kevin, never actually got the collage. And I met him in the street one day, years and years later, and he said, I decided to give you your collage back.
Really? Oh God. And Seán, didn't Oscar Wilde make some comment about the seriousness of art?
Well, Oscar's my man, really. I love Oscar's Well, one of the aphorisms I do love is the pure and simple truth, he said, is never pure and rarely simple.
Yes.
Which is true. And also he said, if you're going to tell people the truth, you better make them laugh.
That's what I was getting at. Yeah.
Otherwise they'll kill you, he said.
That's
which
right.
is, he knew all too well, or discovered indeed.
Yeah.
By the way,
we need to move on fairly swiftly.
The lovely punchline to that, by the way, is that the War Museum some years later bought that collage for 10,000 quid.
Really? Did they?
Yeah. Which is very nice of them. I mean, it was a kind of a consolation prize, I think. And they have kept acquiring work from me, which is wonderful. And they did this very wonderful book, which I must recommend. Some just last year, it's the most beautiful book of war art you'll ever see.
And you're included in that, are you?
No, I'm one of only 4 Northern artists in it, and I've got a big page, and it's that collage in it, which is so I'm extraordinarily proud of it, actually, shamelessly so, and free, of course.
So, Seán, in addition to this, you've also designed a considerable number of book covers.
Well, I wouldn't say designed. In fact, I'm an appalling designer, I've discovered to my pen.
You've lent your artistic genius to some covers.
That's very sweet of you. Well, people like to use my work on book covers.
Yeah.
And I like it very much because it's a huge kind of currency in the world. And they sit on people's shelves, and they sit on bookstore shelves, and they actually, because I, like to grab the audience warmly by the neck, I really want to grab attention with the work. I want you to go, whoa.
Yeah.
And so they make good book covers, and they also, have complexity. So they're not didactic, I like to think. So people do tend to use the same ones, as we see again and again. And they're used for all kinds of different subjects, which is kind of fascinating.
Oh, I can see that. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's very small. We can't really see it terribly well.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things. There's Egypt, like in the Great Pyramids there. The first one to ever use it was an elderly friend of mine called Sheila Lindsay, long past. And she was an astrologer, and she taught me dowsing with a pendulum, which freaked me out because it kind of worked. I was very mystified by it. And she wrote a book called Time Travels of an Irish Psychic, and she put my Great Pyramids on the cover. And it's still going on covers, actually, up to now. It's been on Egyptology, and it's on one of Roy Foster's covers, and it was in the Super Furry Animals cover. She also gave me one of the best bits of advice I've ever had as an artist. I thought to ask her once for advice, and she thought for a while, and she said, make pictures with hidden meaning.
Yeah.
And I always try to do that. I want them to be multiply layered. So Heaney said one of the attractions of my work is its immediate attractiveness, but he also said that it knows its modernist ABCs, but it keeps its romantic P's and Q's.
Yes.
Which is very wise and kind. It might have been the other way around, but I'm trying to do a lot of things at once, and so you can appreciate them. Forgive me.
No. Go on.
Well, I want everybody to love them. Yeah. But different people can love them for different reasons.
Precisely, and that's what I was going to say. In other words, would you? I mean, sometimes a title can actually kill a picture, in my view.
Yes.
Because you're leading the audience in a direction that they not necessarily want to go.
Well, I want the work in itself, but the title to be elusive.
Yeah, exactly.
And elusive, maybe. I mean, I'm definitely someone who makes work that's about ideas, if not things. But as Willie said, it's not about, Willie Yates said, the work isn't about what it appears to be about. He said it's actually about the struggle with yourself in the end. And I think that's truly very wise and probably one of the most essential things about it. But and it turns out like all of my work is kind of autobiographical. I didn't really realize that until relatively late. But I have to have very strong feelings about it in order to do it, and to keep doing it, of course.
Yeah, okay.
Heaney said great things. I also learned enormous things from him. Heaney said one of the things, 3 things about making art, any kind of art. He said, the first thing is getting going. And the second thing is keeping going. And the third thing is getting going again.
Yes.
So that's always a challenge and always, a delight, of course, to get going. This is an example of how my work has influenced advertising. And actually, I could have filled pages and pages with it. Fintan O'Toole wrote in 2011 about the Constellations of Genius work. And he talked about how the kind of mixing of Ireland with foreign, landmarks and stuff had become a cliche of Irish advertising, and pointed to how it's based on my Irelantis. And Irelantis, I was in the kitchen in my council flat in London, and I was pondering my next move, and a country song came on the radio, and it was called "If We Only Had Old Ireland Over Here." It's an emigrant song. Yeah. And the first one of the lines was, "If only Sydney Harbour opened onto Galway Bay."
Lovely.
And I thought, wow,
yes.
how exciting. And I could do something with that,
Sure.
So, but you can see that's a Troubles collage in the top left, which is a Yuri Gagarin one. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm standing actually behind the door of my first car that I owned, and I've collaged on the spacesuit on top of it. And below that is a Renault ad that uses basically exactly the same image.
Yes.
And on the bottom line is my cosmonaut in Annalong Harbour on the left, and then boating on the Liffey in the middle. And they've influenced loads and loads of advertisements and lots of other artists, actually, unfortunately, for better or worse. And actually, I see collage now, to be entirely honest, it's by young people that's influenced by people that are influenced by me, because I've been around that long. Yes, but the advertising in particular, because they're always stealing or looking for ideas from contemporary art.
Yeah.
I used to have a favorite cartoon from Private Eye magazine of a guy with a ponytail in a design studio saying, "Oh, I've just had a brilliant somebody else's idea." But that's what they're paid to do.
Tell me, Sean, on that point, are there copyright issues in that? Because, in a sense, you wouldn't necessarily have taken all of those photographs.
No, in my early work, I used to call them embroidered photographs.
Yes.
So it was very important to me that they were essentially one of my own photographs. And eventually I realized that artistically, I didn't need to use my own photographs because I was so up to speed collaging after 14 years or so. But when Irelantis, the book, came out, it was wildly popular, and there was a phenomenal amount of press and was published everywhere. And I met someone in the street one day, and they said, "Oh, I hear John Hinder suing you. That'll be great for your career." And I was going, "Oh my God," because you really don't want to be sued, No. And I'm very aware, have always been very aware that I'm stealing or using the work of very gifted photographers very often, Yeah. So, I mean...
Has it ever become an issue, Sean?
Well, I had to go then because there was so much attention and it wasn't actually clear. I had to go and get increasingly high and expensive levels of copyright law advice.
Yes.
And the first advice was, "No, you'll be fine." And then the second advice was, "Oh, yes, you could be sued." And then the third advice was, "Yes, you could be sued, but you'll be fine."
Combination of two.
And in the end, copyright law is very complex. So it rests on the loss of value. So for instance, if you use a recognizable person and you infer some quality to them that they mightn't like, you're damaging them.
Yes.
The other thing is that it is a problem because a couple of times I don't really do, I hardly ever do commissions because I find it really, really, really difficult to find my thing in it. And if I'm not really motivated to do it, I'm terrible at commissions. So, and that's a problem in commercial things because whatever image you're using, you're now attaching it to commercial value. So I have to be very careful about that. When I did a set of collages once for the Bank of Ireland through one of the very big agencies. And what I did was I collaged ATMs. They were trying to encourage tourists to use their ATMs, and I collaged their ATMs into Irish landmarks.
Yeah.
So I put an ATM.
We have that. Hang on a second.
Oh, great. Yes. Yeah.
I'm going to move on a little bit anyway.
Do. I'm probably rambling.
But here it is. Yes.
Yeah. The ATM at Blarney Castle.
Lovely.
Yeah. So I had to pay John Hind per fragment of collage for these things, a reasonable amount, because I got paid very well, actually, thankfully. But it was very, very hard work. I would work overnight, email in, because I was working largely in collage, although it's kind of hybridizing in Photoshop. I would dummy things up in Photoshop, make them in collage, email them in the morning. They would focus group them in the afternoon, discuss them, and send me more instructions. And I would do it again and again and again and again until it was perfect. But I love them myself, and I wanted to make things that I could put my name under, and I wanted to make funny things that would get your attention. Yeah,
that's really good.
Thank you. So it's copyright is a delicate thing, but I try, I until lately I've tried not to use the work of contemporary photographers, so it's not really an issue so much.
Yes.
And also, I avoid commercial work for that reason. Although I've just done a wonderful commission for Holy Show magazine, which I'm terribly excited about.
Is this the last one that we have?
I don't know that we have one. I'd love to show you one of them.
It's not that.
No. This is actually, let's find one. This is one of them. It's a brilliant essay.
Hang on.
I can't see my picture, so, thank you. So this is one of my collages.
Yeah, just hold it still there. Yeah.
Called London Uri, number 14, I think it is. And it's a mixture of my mass rock photo in Uri and a London-y scene. And it's got that kind of vertiginous feeling about it.
Yes.
And in the original collage, Julie Andrews is not there. But it's a brilliant essay by the brilliant poet Stephen Sexton. And he wrote an amazing essay about how our personal biographies or autobiographies in our psychic space is related to our media experiences. And they used to be very common, and now they're atomized. And he names all these kind of icons from one's life. And I fell upon his poetry a few years ago, and I fell madly in love with it. He's an amazing poet. And so I was very lucky to be asked to do this, and I had to read the thing and fall in love with the essay. And I was stricken by this idea that I would take some of my collages and I would repopulate them or populate them with new figures. Yeah. And only when I was making the thing did I realize that Julie Andrews there really looks like the Virgin Mary. Yeah. And that's one of the great things about.
She's wearing the wrong color dress, Sean. I told you this.
You did. It's blue and white. It's the way it's inside out the colors, maybe.
I thought it was pink and white.
Hers is dark blue, actually, and white.
Oh, is it? I beg your pardon. I'll take it back.
No, you're right. It's a little bit beigey, but I see it as blue and brewer. Anyway,
I'm going to read out some of the chats that we've seen since the start. Jane German says it's a super film. Seen it 3 times. Yeah, I think we mentioned that. Don't forget to watch that film.
Or you can have your money back, I usually say.
But you're on a Netflix subscription. You don't even have to pay as such. Desmond says, why did you choose collage as a medium?
Because I was a photographer, I think. And also I'd grown up in the pop world, the world of pop art.
Yes.
And also my other huge influence was because I grew up politically minded and wanting to communicate. One of the masters that profoundly affected me was John Hartfield, who's very much worth looking up. His real name was Johann Hertzfelder, and he and his brother were kind of dilettante artists, but leftists during the rise of fascism. And the fascists were master propagandists. And they did counter-propaganda using photo-collage. And they did it I used to say about my style, my Troubles style, that it was sort of half Hartfield, half Warhol. Yeah. And you can see, I mean, I also grew up influenced by like Richard Hamilton and Peter Blake, and British pop art, Perlozzi particularly, I loved, because I was in that aura of British artists, of course. I was very lucky, of course, by the artists that I rubbed shoulders with at the Slade and all of that,
Yeah. Okay, let's read out a few more. Yanni Peters says, Sean's documentary is very moving and evokes the struggles of being an artist. The best of luck, Sean.
Thank you so much.
From Yanni. Desmond again comes back. Do you still cut and paste or do you use Photoshop?
I much prefer to cut and paste. Yeah. If for commissions, I will do some composition in Photoshop. But what I actually do, and I've kind of hybridized it now to this point, where I use Photoshop as a darkroom. Because it used to be that my material came from books largely, or high quality magazines. I can't afford to use low quality magazines or newspapers because the paper will age so badly.
Yeah.
But now,
presumably.
Yeah. But now very high res images are available on the internet of everything. And so my hybrid form now is, because I have these archival printers, I hoard images and I just print them all out the same size. And then I play the same way that I used to.
Yes.
Which is the way that I love to. And I think that way makes the thing much richer, you know, and because it's not preconceived. And because also I'm really enjoying making it. I think you feel that joy and excitement in them when they're good, you know.
Yeah.
I'm doing a new little series called The Way. Let me see if I can find one.
Okay. Just in the interim, Desmond also says, do you still use film or digital camera?
I'm still photographing a great deal. In fact, I wore out another camera this week, unfortunately, a D800, which is £1,000 secondhand.
This is original film.
No, I can't. I have a Hasselblad and I love to use it, but I'm such an insane photographer, and I photograph so much that I couldn't possibly afford to shoot film. I would kind of like to, but I've been using digital cameras for so long. But one of the few times in life I've been wrong.
Yeah.
I used to say was, I remember telling people digital photography would never catch on.
Like the old phones and everything.
Well, I didn't know what was going to happen was that the Cold War ended and the chip makers had nowhere to sell their chips that they were selling into the military.
All right.
And they put them into consumer cameras.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what happened.
Didn't know that.
And that created a market. And then, you know, every year you want a better one. Because they were terrible to begin with.
Yeah, you mentioned the Cold War. Alan Rutherford says, you must have taught Cold War Steve everything he knows, Sean. Amazing, clever, and fascinating work. Thanks for that talk.
I like to think I have influenced people. But photomontage has such a rich history when you go to look that, you know, there's very little that's never been done before. Yeah. And I did try to do things that had never been done before, or to make it fresh, you know.
Yeah, okay. Just reading a couple more. Olwen says, fabulous work, Sean. Great interview.
Oh, sweetheart.
Pamela, terrific artist, genuinely passionate and inspirational.
Can't help it. But not the inspirational bit. That's up to you.
Anna says, Sean, you were amazing. The art is wonderful. The film is great. And Irish says, very interesting in the concept of work that is valued but not for showing. Thinking about the War Museum buying work but not for exhibition.
Yeah, well, they exhibited in the end, you know, but they couldn't. They literally couldn't. I mean, it's very honourable what they did. It's sort of against resistance, kind of, internally, you know. So I want to say hello to my Swedish poet friend, Anarella, by the way, who's watching.
Yeah, off you go.
Well, hi.
Hi. Okay. Sorry, just go back here.
Nikki, and to all my friends, God love you all.
Absolutely. And you have loads of them. Because I know that from when we started to talk about you or announce the fact that you were on, I've had loads of emails from people all over the place. Yeah. Nikki says, such impactful work. Beautiful. Pamela, your studio reassures me. Do you know where everything is?
Sort of. And what I'm very bad with is paper. Paper is the bane of my life.
It's too thin, is
it? No, there's too much of it. And I can't understand filing. I'm completely bemused by the concept of filing. I really, you know, I actually, last year, I think, and in 2015, I was extremely lucky to get large Arts Council bursaries, which meant I was able to hire assistants and wonderful assistants. And with an assistant, I, you know, become more, you know, a Superman, and I can do things. And on my own, I'm sort of a jack of all trades. And that's one of the things about being an artist these days, isn't it? Like last night, I had to figure out DNS servers and stuff to get the bloody website going. And, you know, I have to be a printer, I have to be a social media person, as well as a collagist and several other things. And actually a social creature is one of the things you kind of need to be, which I'm not wildly skilled at, I don't think.
No, and I think also the business of autism, you know, is restrictive in one sense and liberating in another, I think, with you in particular.
It's both. It's kind of a superpower with, you know,
with serious drawbacks.
With serious drawbacks, yeah. And like they do say, when I went looking to read about the condition, I mean, it's in the end, it's a label for a bag of traits. But I do believe there is a there. I think there is a thing called Asperger's, and like all my heroes I pretty much think had it. But like, and my heroes would be literary, really, because I grew up as an omnivorous reader, and I would read the dictionary, and my favorite book might be an etymological dictionary or a lexicon of some sort, because I love words. But my hero, Joyce and Yeats and Beckett, waiting for the Nobel Prize, and Paddy and Brennan and Miles drinking themselves to death.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a lottery, There's a class division there, I think, but it is also it's luck and a lot of other things. So it's a mixed blessing.
Mixed indeed.
And also, forgive me, I discovered that one of the things I was frightened to read was that undiagnosed Aspie males have a 70% divorce rate.
Oh.
Yeah. Because they're a pain in the ass to live with, especially if they don't have the self-awareness of what they are, Like there used to be, and I'm not talking about myself now, but I have friends I would speak about who are used to being the smartest guy in the room. And it can breed a kind of arrogance. And that's not really very healthy. And it can become kind of toxic. That's the source of the kind of, the mad scientist.
I know, yeah.
But, and also they're often, like, they turn out to be revolutionaries. They're differently talented. And again, some of them spend their lives in their bedrooms, but they often get the idea that they know how to fix the world, and they're going to do it one-handedly.
Yes.
And nothing is going to stop them.
I know.
And I'm afraid I was that guy, that I have all my life been going to do my art at any cost. And it's been the enormous cost of people around me, I've had 3 long relationships with wonderful women who at the end of it just couldn't take it anymore.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there's 2 sides of that, because with your relationship with Amy, which you refer to in the film, and things were going very swimmingly.
Yes. We're very close.
Yes.
And I have that relationship actually with most of my ex-partners. We're still extremely close.
Yeah.
But we're not in active romance really at the moment. The problem is 3,500 kilometers to quite autistic people who aren't rich, and 3,500 kilometers. But also both our lives have kind of changed and moved on. And I am very, very driven, and I need to push this career forward, because, to be entirely frank, my great existential fear was the work falling out of history.
Yes.
And I have been left out of important books that I ought to be in. Yeah. Although I'm showing up in more and more and more important books.
I think that's about to change, though, with anyone.
Well, thank you. And Amy's life improved, and she got a lovely little house to live in. And we'll see. You never know what'll happen. Like, I've always had fairly unorthodox relationships. Yeah. And I think that that's the nature as well, especially of autistic people. And it's good if you can roll with it, But I've had to learn a lot of, I've had a lot of lessons over the years, and I've had to learn painfully emotional intelligence, Like, I really wasn't that guy. I was very solipsistic and self-obsessed, to be entirely honest, and just obsessed with whatever the hell I was doing at the moment.
I know, like a lot of artists.
Oh, completely. And I hope have to be.
I hope you're still looking after your garden in the back there.
Oh my God, I adore. Well, yeah, it's a proper little garden now, which is wonderful. I only get a slice of sunlight. One of the wonderful things about this house is it is a kind of a bunker, and it is very private. And I do have a little tent of sky in a little yard with high walls, which is a really wonderful thing. I can actually, and the walls are glass, so I can actually go to bed looking at the stars, which is
lovely,
in the middle of a city.
Fantastic.
And I have a tiny little garden as well, which is really wonderful. Yeah, I mean, I'm insanely lucky.
Yeah.
You're
a lovely fella, Seán, and as it has been said before, you are a national treasure.
That's very sweet.
And I wish you every future success. And
thank you so much.
If there's any way any of us can assist you in your endeavors,
well, people can consider buying work from me.
It's the one thing people, I think, are remiss at doing, and that is simply asking.
Yeah. Well, it's partly my own fault. It's it's partly that my work is small and on paper and rare, and it's hard. I needed to really establish a very high reputation in order to justify the prices that I need to get. And also because I sold so much of it for so long, I'm really trying to hold on to a lot of it. And like the film, does have like 250,000 views now, and is very much saving my skin. and I'm going to publish, I hope, 3 books at the end of this year.
Yeah.
A memoir and a collage book and another book that I'm very much looking forward to. So everything is going in the right direction, I'm glad to say.
That's wonderful. Wonderful.
Thank you.
And a great note to finish on. Seán, thank you so much for being with us this morning. It was fantastic. Really.
Oh, you're very kind. Pleasure. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here.
Not at all. Yes, indeed. Thanks everyone for who's been watching live this morning, and also for the many, many more people who are going to be watching on YouTube.
You're very
welcome.
welcome.
So much, all of you. And we all wish you every success in the future, Seán.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.